you don't necessarily have to have, you know, pages and pages. They just say basically that you have to have minutes. And so this is easy for regular city commission meetings, regular county commission meetings, etc., legislative meetings, things like that. Everybody gets minutes, but where it gets a little hairy and where it's violated 9 times out of 10 are on the different committees that meet. And the different committees that meet, the Traffic Safety Committee, the Liquor Control Board, whatever different subcommittees or committees you have in different cities and counties, they also have to take minutes under state law. Now, a lot of them don't, but they should be reminded of that. And stuff. So it is required. And then 440421.1 is the AG's, is the Attorney General opinion statute, where the people are authorized to ask for an Attorney General's opinion. So let's just take a look real quick at and I'm just going to add too that since that time, since we had the basic statutes, which ended when we first revised the law in 1997, we kind of ended with the Attorney General's opinion stuff. That was the piece de resistance, the biggest deal we got, because we were the only state at the time that allowed citizens to request Attorney General's opinions. Under our state law prior, you had to be a public official to request a state Attorney General's opinion. You had to be a mayor, a city councilman, or a city commissioner, or something like that. Under our law, and I think it's probably still unique that Joe Blow, anybody can ask for an Attorney General's opinion on records, not on anything else, but just on public records. So that is unusual. But since that time, we've gone now to 440432, and so they've added all these little things since then. And 440432 is kind of one of my favorites because it talks about feedlots and feedlot records. And about 10 years ago or so, this cattlemen and the people that deal with cattle felt that it was important that feedlots be regulated and organized under state law, and that they be in effect certain. You have to register a feedlot in effect. You can't just start a feedlot on your own and do whatever the hell you want to do and call it a feedlot. You have to meet certain rules and requirements. So then they said, well, who's going to do that? Well, the Secretary of Agriculture was a primary person. So then they said, okay, we're going to make everybody who has a feedlot file the records with the Secretary of the Agriculture Secretary. And the opposition to that at the time was that this was the highlight. This was, like I said, 10 or 15 years ago when we were worried about terrorists every place. And the opposition said, well, and the legislature said, well, if you have the feedlots recorded, the locations in the agriculture office, the terrorists are going to find out where those feedlots are, and they're going to go and poison all the cattle and ruin our thing. And the other people said, where the feedlots are, it's no secret where the feedlots are. If you have a feedlot in your town, everybody knows it. So it's not a secret that the terrorists have to go to the Agriculture Commissioner's office to get records for it. And if any of you have been by feedlots lately, you know what that is. So let's take a quick look, and this will have to be a quick look because we don't have a whole lot of time. And I'm just going to cover just a few of the areas. The other thing to remember too, one of the questions, and I'm going to comment on a lot of questions I get. The other one concerns records. And other than minutes, North Dakota state law does not have any laws requiring the retention of records. They do have a general statute under the OMB office that encourages all public entities to have a record retention policy. And then they have sample record retention policies. that these public entities can use. They strongly recommend that, and in fact, they will help any public entity develop a record retention policy if you don't have one. But unfortunately, and so the bigger entities, there's no question, they have record retention policies, the Bismarck City, Fargo, places like that. But a lot of the little communities and little public entities don't have any record retention policy. And so the question I have is when somebody will call up a week later and they'll say, I want a copy of the letter that the contractor wrote to the city commission that he was upset about the last bid or something. And the city commission or the city council or the mosquito vector district director will say, we don't have that, or we just threw it away. And then the reporter's out, how can they do that? How they got to have a record, they got to keep a copy of it. Well, no, they don't. That's unfortunate, but there's no record. And of course, that gets even worse now when so much stuff is done on the internet via emails and stuff like that, so that if somebody sends an email to a city councilman, for instance, and if this is a city councilman in a very small town, let's say in Dunn County, or if it's in Manning, North Dakota, somebody will send an email to the city commissioner or to the city mayor, and he'll just read the email and delete it. And then when you go to ask for a copy, he says, I deleted it, it's gone. And how can you? Well, that's because there is no law that says you have to retain the records. So, just that should just be as a reminder that if you're looking for a public record, you better act quickly to get it, because it may not be around all that long. And obviously, there are other factors involved that require public agencies to keep some of these records. And a big one, of course, is insurance. If you're having a construction project or anything that involves money and insurance, and you seek to get any help from your insurance companies, the first thing they're going to ask for is the records, and the insurance company will require that you keep records of all these operations. And so there are some different obvious other things involved. The big thing, the main law for the access to records is 440418. And 440418 has got several sections of the statute, so I'm not going to go through and read every section. But the basic tenet of the law of 440418 to remember is that every record of a public entity is a public record, and a person has to give it to you. And so when you ask for a record, that law also says a couple important things. First of all, it does not have to be in writing, and you don't have to give the reason why you want the record. Those are two of the key factors. So the old common thing, we went to a county recorder or a county auditor and wanted a record, first thing, what do you want it for? What do you want that for? Well, you don't have to tell them. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. And they can't ask you under state law. They can't ask you. Some of them still do, but they can't ask you. The other thing is that if they deny you the record, they have to give you the specific state statute that says why they can deny the record. They can't just say it's not a public record. They have to tell you why, section 440418.8 or something like that. So don't just take a denial outright. They have to give you a reason for the denial. And the other thing is that it's the other thing is that they can't deny the record to you because it contains some confidential information. State law requires that you redact, is the fancy word for it. That means blackout the confidential information, and then give the record. And that's, and most of the time in any of these public records, the confidential information is only in the first part of the record. And 99, well, I shouldn't say 99, but probably 75% of the time it's some personal information, some telephone numbers or names or bank account numbers or things like that. The bulk of the record is probably open anyway. So the other thing to remember is that under that law is that the rough drafts of documents are not public records, only the finished product. So that if city commissioner asks the city auditor to prepare a report dealing with how taxes are levied and how appraisals work or something, and the city auditor says, I'll get to that, I'll do that. If he's got a rough draft that he's working on, you can't see the rough draft until it is completed, and then sent to the city commissioner or whomever asked for it. That, by the way, is also the state law, that the same thing that works with the state auditor's office. The state auditor oftentimes will prepare an audit, and then he'll send his first draft to the person being audited or the entity being audited and say, here's what we're going to do. Tell us what's wrong with it and stuff. That rough draft is not a public record, but the final audit is a public record. So basically, the personal information about individual city government workers, most of the what they call personal information are confidential records. The names are not confidential, but things like social security numbers, bank accounts, any medical records that you might have in there, stuff like that that might be in a personnel record are confidential. However, and this is where we are one of the very few states, maybe perhaps the only one, that personnel records are public records. And so you can go into any school board, any superintendent's office of the Grand Forks Superintendent of Schools and ask to see the personnel record for a teacher, and that is an open record. So you have no problems. So if you have the personnel record is in there, they may have some warnings, they may have some complaints, they may have things like that. Those are public records. We're one of the very few states that allow access to personnel records. And the only place where there's some provisions against this, and that involves some of the law enforcement people. And the reason for that is they're afraid that the bad guys, the people that the law enforcement people deal with, will use those personnel records against the particular police officer. So that if a police officer arrests somebody for a crime, and that person, that criminal, then can't go and get that policeman's personnel record and find out personal information about him, maybe some family information or where he lives or things like that. So I'm not going to try to talk about the confidentiality of trade secret proprietary information, because that's an extremely complicated area, and it's one that has got a ton of current controversy about it, and mainly it involves the legacy fund. And Amy Dalrymple will certainly know about that, because she has been leading the charge, or her newspaper has, in trying to find some information from the legacy fund. And Fargo Forum has done the same thing. And it's kind of I should say, kind of like a work in progress. It's just a difficult area to surmount. I think the records that the media are seeking should be open, but the agencies are fighting back like crazy, and it's going to be a difficult area. The other area, the next area that we get a lot of questions about is law enforcement records. Every time there's a crime, particularly a crime of what's called a notorious crime, a well-publicized crime, like the shooting yesterday in Fargo, where a couple people were killed, which is kind of eerily similar, by the way, to the Isaac case, where except in this case, it was pretty clear the guy was fired. He went back out and got a gun and came back in and shot the people who fired him. So, Amy, you better be careful about that when you talk to editors, you talk to some of your reporters and stuff. You better do it by email on the firing, so or text them or something. But in any event, criminal history record information, it's all full of loopholes, because when we were drafting this law, we had a big help of the Attorney General's office. At that time, it was Heidi Heitkamp. And while Heidi was an enthusiastic backer of open meetings and open records, she wasn't about to gut law enforcement by making all of the law enforcement records public records. And so the big loophole is active investigation. Any active investigation records are closed records. And of course, the police and the sheriffs are very quick to jump on that, just like the little bulldog with a bone, and they'll say everything we do is investigation, so we're all confidential. However, there is a good section of law in that thing that says what is not confidential. And in other words, it's not criminal history investigative information. And I'm just going to read what it is. And that's in the second subsection of 4404-18.7. So criminal history investigative information does not include arrestee description, including name, date of birth, race, sex, physical description. So when they arrested the guy, they could tell you what his name is, what his race is, his age, all that sort of thing. Facts concerning the arrest. What caused the arrest? Where was it? Conviction information. Has this guy been convicted before? Deposition of warrants, including order signed by a judge. Did you serve a search warrant on the guy? A chronological list of incidents. That's the overnight report, the log. At least every major law enforcement agency, the policemen and stuff come in and they put in a log, what happened overnight and stuff, and the dispatcher keeps a record. We got a call from so-and-so, we had a call from so-and-so, officer so-and-so stopped a fight at this house, that sort of thing. Those are all public records. A crime summary of what kind of crimes have been logged in and committed. The radio log, including listing of the calls dispatched, so you can go in every night and say, was so-and-so dispatched to this place. General registers, jail booking information. That came into play just, again, yesterday or day before, I can't remember the days now, when the tax commissioner was stopped in a motel because he was intoxicated, and then the jail records showed that he was actually booked into the jail that night to kind of detox. And that wasn't publicly known until somebody looked at the jail records and saw, well, here was an entry. He was not arrested, but nevertheless, he was booked into the jail. So those records, those booking records, can produce some very good stories, and they shouldn't be ignored. And of course, the last one, which has had the terrible fight last legislative session, are mugshots. The mugshots are public records, and despite all the efforts in the regular session, the 21 regular session, to close those mugshots, they're still public records, at least until the next legislative session, I guess. One interesting point in 4404 18.10, that's the one that says that you can't deny a public record because there's confidential information. However, it's an interesting point which has come up sometimes, and one of the provisions of the law says an officer or an employee of a public entity may disclose or comment on the substance of a open record, and any agreement prohibiting the disclosure or comment is void and against public policy. So you have these areas where they say, well, we don't want you talking about that public record. We don't want you saying anything to the report. We don't want you talking to the reporters. That's against the law. And I think they were trying to do that. I think it was the land board, perhaps, Amy, or what, I forget the exact agency. But you can't have a public policy that says a public official can't tell you what's in a public record. He doesn't have to. The law says he doesn't have to, but if he wants to, you can't prohibit him. So if you ask a public employee, well, what is, just tell me what's in there, what's it saying? If he says, well, what it does is it does this and that without having to read 10 pages or 15 pages. That's not against the law, and an agency can't keep him from doing that. So that's very important. Keeping track of my time here, I don't want to get overtime here. You can look at all the other areas. The one that causes problems is still has changed about the number of applicants for public positions, and that's still that, until they have 3 finalists, they're not going to make the applicants public, basically. 440419 is access to public meetings, and basically it says that all meetings are public. However, there are a couple exemptions that come into play sometime, and mostly it involves meetings with your attorney when you're discussing active litigation, or when you're meeting with an attorney or a negotiator. It doesn't have to be an attorney to discuss, to discuss the negotiations or going to buy some property. The most common thing is the two most common areas that this comes up are in school boards, when you're discussing or trying to negotiate teacher salaries. And the teacher salary stuff comes up every year, every couple of years. It all depends on how long you can make the contract. And every single year, the issue comes down to what is going to be the base pay that's offered. And the school boards are trying to say, well, we're going to go to this and that and this. And just to simplify things, they'll say, well, the beginning teachers are going to want, we'll go as high as $40,000 per year, but try to keep it to 35 if you can, but we'll go as high as 40. Well, if the teachers knew you were going to go as high as 40, then there wouldn't be any use to negotiate, because they would just say, we want the 40, we want more, and we know you're going to go to 40. The same with buying property or buying buildings or doing something like that. If the school board or the city commission is thinking about buying some property, for instance, to build a new police department or a new school, they'll say, well, we'll pay so much per acre, we'll pay so much, but we won't go above this or that. But if the sellers knew what the negotiator was going to offer, could offer, that would destroy the negotiations. So those types of things are the result of confidential or closed meetings. A lot of times city commissions and county commissions will try to close the meeting to discuss other things, and those are not proper meetings. And a very common one is whether they're going to fire somebody. And that's not, you have people who are criticizing a public official. And so then they'll say the school board, the county commission, we want to talk about this. That has to be done in a public meeting. We want to fire the football coach. He hasn't won a game in 3 years. And so, but you've got to talk about his or her performance, if you want to call it that, or about whether to fire him or not in a public meeting. The other thing to remember about closed and confidential meetings is that any decision that has to be made by a vote has to be made in a public meeting. So you can't decide to do something and then vote, we vote to do this and that. You may be able to say we're going to negotiate to buy the McDonald land in North Bismarck to build a new school, and we're going to do this and that. So then when they come out, and they're going to say, the vote will be that we voted to give our negotiator the authority to purchase and in negotiations to buy the McDonald property. But you don't have to tell about all the confidential stuff that went into that negotiations. So it's The other thing that remember in 4404 19.2 covers it real well is the process to go into for a closed meeting. And what you need to do, and again, this is an area that's violated a whole lot, but what you need to do is vote in the public meeting to go into the closed meeting. And when you do that vote, you have to say the reason why under state law. So you might say, well, we're going to go into a closed session under 4404 19 point whatever to discuss with our negotiator the negotiating prices to buy some property or to set the school board salaries or whatever it is. And then they go into the closed session. During that closed session, minutes, it has to be recorded. I shouldn't say minutes. It has to be recorded. There has to be a recording of some kind. And of course, with new technology, that's changing now to cell phones and to whatever else it is. But you know, it used to be the old-fashioned tape recorder. Was what it used to be, but now it's all kinds of different things. But it has to be recorded. Now, I get a lot of requests that say, "Can't I get a copy of that recording?" And the answer is no, you can't. The only person who can get a copy of that recording is the Attorney General, and he can only get it if somebody thinks that they went into a closed session illegally. So that if there's a closed session of the Bismarck School Board, and afterwards one of the reporters thinks that that was not properly done, not properly called, and they file not a complaint, they file a request for an Attorney General's opinion. Excuse me. I get all choked up talking about Attorney General's opinions. If you file a request for an opinion, then the Attorney General goes and gets a copy of that recording and listens to it to see if there really was, if it really was under a proper thing. He can't record those, he can't release those records either. So he's had several requests that after the opinion on whether the meeting was proper or not, reporters have then asked the Attorney General, I get a copy of your recording. And no, he can't give that out under state law. So, and the last one that is a kind of an important one about open meeting exemptions is the legislature. And under our Constitution, it says all meetings of the legislature and any committees thereof are open meetings. Long ago, it was decided that the different caucuses in the legislature, such as the Republican caucus or the Democratic caucus, are in effect public entities. They're a part of the legislature. And so there's when we passed the last changes in 1997, John Dorsey was the majority leader in the House. He was not a real nice guy, and he didn't like open meetings and open records. He didn't like the media period, and he fought tooth and nail about having to have open Republican caucuses. And finally, we worked out the grand compromise, which Jack Durer knows of well, is that if the caucuses meet in the Capitol, they're public. If the caucuses meet someplace else, they're not public. Now, I understand that doesn't jive with the idea that they're a public entity, but sometimes you have to just hold your breath and get something passed to get it passed. And so anybody who covers the legislature will know that the Republicans oftentimes will meet over at the Republican headquarters, or they'll meet up at the Greater North Dakota Association office, or they'll meet someplace else. Or they used to be a favorite, the Elks Club was a favorite place, so they would meet at the Elks Club and have dinner and decide things, and then they come back up to the Capitol. But if they meet in the Capitol, which they sometimes have to do because of the timing of the factor, they need to discuss things for the floor session coming up the next hour. They'll often meet in Brindle Haugen room or one of the appropriation room. Those are public meetings. Anybody can go in there that wants to. Lobbyists, the public, the media, anybody. So they're open meetings. So as long as they're in the Capitol, they're open. If they're someplace else, they don't have to be open. They could let you in if they want to, I guess, but under state law, they don't have to. And I understand that some lobbyists and other people do attend some of those meetings. I doubt if they would let a reporter in. So the other thing is we're kind of getting short on time here. The notices, just a quick thing is that when you have public meetings, the state law, and I'm going to generalize here because the notice laws cover every level of state government. Any meeting from the state agencies all the way down to the lowest mosquito control vector district entity in Grand Forks. But nevertheless, the hard rule of thumb is that if you meet regularly, you've got to file those regular meetings. Like the city commission meets on the second Tuesday of every month. Okay, so then for the year, you have to file that, say you have to file notice that you're going to meet on the second Tuesday of every month with the Secretary of State, if you're a state agency, with the county auditor, or the city auditor, if you're a county or city, and so forth on down the line. For special meetings, if you call a special meeting, you have to give the notice at the same time that you give the notice to the members. And when you give the notice to the members, and sometimes there's emergency meetings because a roof has collapsed or there's been a fire in a school or something like that, you have to give a notice to the county newspaper, the official news, not the county newspaper, the official newspaper of that entity. Every public entity has to have an official newspaper. You have to give a notice to that and to anyone else who asks for that notice. And that notice has to give the subject for the meeting. And then you can only discuss that subject at that meeting, not anything else. So you can't say, well, there was a fire in the local high school and it burned down the gym. And so we're going to have to hold all our activities to someplace else. And then the school board guy says, well, as long as we're here, what are we going to do with that football coach that lost those for 3 years in a row? Let's fire him too. And so you can, no, you can't. So when you have special meetings, you can only discuss at the special meeting what the special meeting was for. And now some agencies get a little cute about that, and they kind of give some kind of wishy-washy, we're going to discuss this, and we may also discuss general issues of doing this or that. And the Attorney General said, no, you can't do that. You've got to say specifically what the special meeting is for. You just can't say any other business of interest to the body or something like that. So that's for the meeting notices. The other thing to remember on the Attorney General's opinions, two things. I see we're getting kicked out. Oh, 51 seconds. Holy smokes. If you're going to request an Attorney General's opinion, you basically have to do it within 30 days of when the event occurred, unless it was done in secret or something, then you have 90 days. And the other thing is that the Attorney General's opinions, unfortunately, are taking about 3 or 4 months to process. And so if you ask for an Attorney General's opinion on a big issue, you're not going to get an opinion for 4 months. That may make it kind of a hollow issue. It may not be worth it. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them. I don't know if we're still in here even, to tell you the truth. Maybe not.
Thanks, Jack.
Okay, it says leave breakout room here.
Hi, everyone.